With round shoulders and pigeon toes, Bob Fosse used his physical limitations to create unorthodox, misaligned, and angular dance moves that unleashed a whole new way of movement onto the world. From his twist-inspired frug of the psychedelic Sweet Charity, through the decadent, risque routines of cabaret and Fellini-esque set pieces of all that jazz, Bob Fosse was a revolutionary dancer, choreographer, and director.
Oh, blimey, Bob Fosse's influence in contemporary life.
I think he's played a huge part in the world of dance.
In the dance world, everyone knows who Bob Fosse is.
Almost like the Picasso of choreographers. Completely subverted everything and was a rebel.
He rebelled by using unorthodox dance moves that went completely against the grain, utilizing twitches, hip pumps, and articulating hands to create a new, highly personal kind of choreography, captivating his audience and placing himself firmly on the map.
So Bob Fosse was an incredible dancer, he was a choreographer, he was a director. I mean, he was just, I would say, everything.
First thing that springs to my mind would have to be sexy, chic, and stylish.
His dance style was also incredibly energetic and athletic. A beautiful example of this is in his 1955 performance of Alley Dance.
Fosse's style is so unique. He was able to make all his dancers just have a pose or just have a look that was more powerful than if they kicked their legs 20 times, throwing up the hat magically, so it's anti-gravity.
The way they hit the beat, that's all Bob Fosse.
He sort of ripped up the rule book and found beauty in ugliness.
Bob Fosse conjures up showbiz. Bob Fosse is showbiz. It's Showtime, folks.
Born in Chicago in 1927 to a Norwegian-American father and an Irish-born mother who both had failed showbiz aspirations, Robert Bob Louis Fosse took his first dance class at the age of 8 and in no time turned professional, alongside childhood pal Charles Grass as part of the Riff Brothers duo at the age of 13. Fosse's experiences as part of the act included working late nights at seedy burlesque and strip clubs before he'd reached puberty.
He spent a childhood hanging out with strippers, basically. And that's an aesthetic that seems to have seeped into his later work.
I didn't know so much about how exposed Bob Fosse was to life and the sort of seediness of it. I think it's so obvious when you see how sexualized and the use of the dancers' bodies his work is, that it couldn't have helped but seep into him.
If I imagine sort of playing out the scenes in cabaret and how risque they were and how openly sex and drugs and, you know, sort of multi-sexual groups, and that was so, you know, it was so big and so just everywhere and for everyone to see. But I think of my 14-year-old being somewhere like that is horrifying. So as a 13-year-old boy, he must have just experienced so many different things at such a young age, which I'm sure really did stick with him. And some people might say, for all the wrong reasons, he shouldn't have been there, but actually look what it created.
whilst the clubs may not have been the most wholesome environments for a young man, Fosse's home life was also far from perfect. He even went so far as to compare his father to Arthur Miller's womanizing Willy Loman. "My father, always a glad hand, always pretending to be up. When my mother died, we found out he had been seeing another woman for years. You know, stockings and all, just like Willy Loman." After high school, the restless Bob Fosse enlisted in the Navy, working as part of an entertainment unit in the Pacific until his discharge in 1947. He caught the acting bug when he joined the American Theater Wing in New York City. But Bob's focus was always dance, and he moved to New York with the aspiration of becoming the new Fred Astaire. It wasn't long before he came to the attention of Jerry Lewis and Dean Martin, at the time the biggest stars in the U.S., who invited him to appear on their comedy show, The Colgate Hour, alongside his first wife, Mary Ann Niles.
You don't see many clips of Bob Fosse's early work, but what's really clear is what a technically accomplished dancer he was. When he went to Hollywood, the movie director Stanley Donen, who's most famous for things like Singing in the Rain and On the Town, he thought he was going to be the next Fred Astaire. It's partly because he arrived in Hollywood sort of towards the end of the big musicals era that didn't happen. It may also have been to do with the fact that we don't know if he was much of an actor.
Lots of people sort of compare Bob Fosse to like Fred Astaire, for example, who could act, talk, and then sort of slide into the dance balletically. And as if there was no difference between the character who was dancing and it was the same character he was playing in that musical. Fosse was a bit more balletic than that, more like Nureyev, for example, who could perform through the dance. He had a character while he was doing the dance. You didn't want to hear Bob Fosse speak. Shut up and dance. Bob Fosse got lucky in that he met people that said, you can do more than just do a nightclub act. But he couldn't do it unless he worked and took lessons and learned every aspect of the dance and every aspect of filmmaking. You know, you can't just turn up on set and point a camera and suddenly, hey, you've got Sweet Charity. No, there's a lot of hard work that goes into it. So I would say luck is 5%, turning up is 80%, and the rest is talent.
In 1953, Fosse moved into acting, working for MGM, but a dance sequence that he choreographed in the film Kiss Me Kate brought him to the attention of Broadway producers, and it is here that we first see a fearless demonstration of his quirky and angular style. His move toward choreography was well-timed, as he was starting to doubt himself as leading man material, blaming his thinning hair and ungainly hands as factors.
Fosse is not a traditionally strapping, good-looking, handsome man. There's something very dynamic about him and indeed quite sexual about him.
Bob Fosse always said that he put hats into his choreography to cover up his hair loss. He was embarrassed about that, as many men are. But I think what that shows is that you can overcome any physical deficiencies, if that indeed is a physical deficiency.
Did that drive him into choreography? Could you even ask the question, would we be talking about him today if he wasn't bald? You know, there's an essay in that. I don't know where he was in himself, if he didn't feel he was going to continue doing well because he was losing his hair. So perhaps he did it did make him think, well, I'll have to give up on that and concentrate somewhere else. I'm quite grateful for his lack of hair then, because he wouldn't have brought so much joy to my life.
He may not have been classically good-looking, but he had no shortage of female admirers, by now already on to his second marriage to dancer Joan McCracken. Fosse credited McCracken as being the one who encouraged him to see himself as more than a performer and devote himself to choreography. 1954. Returning to Broadway, Fosse wins his first Tony Award for choreography for the musical Pajama Game, and then again for the stage musical Damn Yankees the following year. It starred Gwen Verdon, who also won a Tony for her role as the vampish leading lady, Lola. Vernon was to later become Fosse's third and final wife, and was a formative influence on Fosse in terms of his career. A superb choreographer herself, she encouraged and mentored him, working closely as dancer, choreographer, and muse. When Damn Yankees was adapted for the screen in 1958, Verdon once again starred and Bob choreographed. Dancing together in perfect synergy, it sealed their reputation as a mesmerizing and trailblazing couple.
He was very clever. He got his foot in the door. He did what was kind of expected to make a show work, and I think he cleverly manoeuvred people's minds, as in the producers and the directors, of where the show should be. I think as time went on, and Damn Yankees, and then from beyond that, he started to be brave and realised that actually he didn't have to be wafty. It wasn't all about big arms, big legs. He could actually just do small, intricate moves that were really effective.
Whilst his career was on the up, self-doubt and anxiety were never far away, and he was always looking for an edge over other choreographers. A driving force, perhaps, as his best work was yet to come.
In the 1960s, Broadway was, as it always has been, the leader of the world's musicals. And I think Fosse knew that there was a toughness to working in Broadway, that it was the Great White Way. As much as movies in Hollywood were attracting people on the Greyhound bus, Broadway had the pull on the other coast. And he was one of those that had turned up. You know, you can't just turn up in New York and dance on the stage. There are thousands of people, and it's hard work. You want fame, well, fame costs, and you have to sweat for it. And Fosse did all that. Bob Fosse isn't known as one of the great stage directors in the history of Broadway. He's certainly known as a great choreographer. And I think maybe it was the dance that attracted him more. He couldn't be bothered with the rehearsing of dialogue. All of that took away from the energy of what he wanted, which was the dance.
By now, Fosse had forged what came to be his signature style, utilizing striking silhouettes, moving spotlights, and groupings of dancers in tight synchronization.
Bob Fosse is an immediately identifiable choreographer. You see his choreography, you know in a nanosecond it's his. He's got an incredibly individual style which resonates through generations.
This included the use of turned-in knees, which Fosse based on his own pigeon toes, as well as the famous Fosse amoeba, sideways shuffling, rolled shoulders, and of course, jazz hands.
But then he sort of created his own shapes that were very, very awkward and tough for dancers to do. I mean, incredibly physically taxing.
Because sometimes the movements of Fosse are quite simple and quite small, they think it's not as difficult or as energetic, but actually it's harder because it's about placing. You can't just throw your arms and legs wherever and see where they end up.
But it's not just that, it's drawing attention to it.
Yes.
It's actually showing the audience how that works in the body.
Like shining a torch on one part of your body a bit.
If you can isolate areas of your body and bring performance through your physicality, then that's a really beautiful thing.
Oh, Bob Fosse's style is definitely sexy. Definitely has that sexual undertone in every single movement that he does.
I think he got to the core of what makes people want to dance, and he really nailed that. I don't think anyone else in the history of Broadway or film kind of worked up to the dance. You know, most people work up to the singing. He worked up to when the emotions were so strong, you just had to dance.
Okay, so what we've been trying to do is try and work on the essence of Fosse, which was isolation, isn't that right? So rather than great big grand dramatic movements like ballet is, it's saying exactly the same thing as you were saying, James, but in a tiny way. So expressing yourself in a tiny mini movement that says just as many volumes as a giant movement in ballet, you know. Yes, 4. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2. Very nice. Turn in more, Claire.
Soft. Okay. It's soft and it goes through smoke almost.
Exactly. Someone has to try and understand what's going on in your head, and you make them want to understand. That's what you do.
1,
2,
3, 7, 8, a right, a
1,
left,
2,
a right,
3, and
together,
4 and 5.
and open.
Okay, so we're egg mayonnaising. So today we only had 3 hours, and we had 2 dancers that are they've done a lot of Fosse, and we had 2 that weren't, because we thought that would be quite interesting. So it was just a case of plucking bits and amalgamating them, all parts of his work, in a Fosse style, in a rehearsal space, to see the process of how it works and the process of putting it together.
That could work.
That looks nice.
Could work. We could Fosse it out in some way.
Yeah. If we get the bones of it, and then I'll make it make sense. Imagine you're in silhouette. So we see the hand. Imagine you're wearing white gloves.
I would say that as a choreographer, you get quite obsessive about getting it exactly right. I mean, we could move in again and then move out again. And then we could do a side and a back, because that's very Fosse, isn't it? The person that's making it needs to look at it again. They might change it, and they might bring it back. And a 1. Left turn. 5, 6, 7, 8. 1 and 2. 1 and 2. 1 and 2. Now, next section. Let's go to the next section. We'll add some in. Toes might be bleeding, or your legs are hurting, your muscles are aching, or you've got a fracture in your foot, or you've lost a toenail, or whatever. You just carry on. You just do it, because that's your job.
E-E. Let's go from E-E.
Let's go for the 1, 2, and 3. Yeah? 1, 2, and a 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8.
Well, as a ballet dancer, you're always working outward.
Turn out.
Turn
So
out.
the rotation of the hip socket.
Rotation. Fosse, I think, was taught ballet and tap, and then developed his own style, a bit like Graham, from his own body. His hips were quite tight, and so he choreographed for parallel and some turned-in movements. Turned-in movements very rare in dance. The only other instance of it is in Nijinsky's Sacre du Printemps,
and also Petrushka.
And Petrushka, yes.
See, I did learn from her.
Taught you something. Something you remember.
1. Slowly to the audience there.
First thing that I think about are the Fosse walks, like in Chicago when you walk forward and the hands are just moving behind. Such a simple move, but such a sexy and effective one.
Eggs in the hands, I call it. So the rolling of the wrists, flapping of the wrists, hands up high as well. You know, just the tip, just how you would use the hands. A rolling of the shoulders. The weird, collapsing, totally awkward and angular and bloody brilliant.
But with Fosse, it's a thought, so you have to really think what you're trying to say, like whether you're happy or you're sad, or what you mean, and then that's what you're giving the audience.
He presents you with a very sort of sexy image, the hips, the shoulders going, but actually it's got female agency in it, I think, and you don't feel that the woman is being exploited.
I love it. Lots of dancers have a style that they're naturally drawn to, and I feel like it sits very well on my body. It's an acquired technique, definitely, and an acquired style that takes a lot of practice. And I don't know, it definitely can be taught and you can break down the movements, but there are some people who I think naturally it's in their bones. I think definitely when I watch some people do it, it just sits naturally in their body.
He confines the movement very much. He doesn't use spatial patterns much, except in Rich Man's Frog.
Does a lot of sideways and then forwards and backwards, but not much diagonal.
Yeah.
Like with ballet, it's all extending with the arm, extending with the leg, and actually it's, with Fosse, it's about leading with a shoulder or a hip and keeping it quite internal, which is completely the opposite of everything I've been taught for most of the things.
The move that we did with the foot coming in with the hat is a move that Anne Ranking does in All That Jazz, and I'm absolutely her #1 fan, and you know, and her execution of that particular movement is so stunning, and she's so clean, and she's so inspiring to watch. That I think that's my favourite move today.
Rolling hips and shoulders, and an overall strutting impression capped off the cool and modern feel as Fosse amassed an enviable amount of original dance moves. Fame beckoned when in 1966 he directed and choreographed Verdun again in the smash hit musical Sweet Charity. But as the 60s drew to a close, he was to make his debut in the area for which Fosse is perhaps best known, the movies.
Bob Fosse makes his first movie as a director when he's 41 years old. He comes to movies late. He'd choreographed other movies, but he didn't direct until then. And he absolutely learns on the job, and he turns himself into a highly skilled filmmaker.
Sweet Charity, a movie that was unmistakably of the 60s, was Bob Fosse's directorial debut in 1969, starring Shirley MacLaine. Featuring psychedelic dance routines, flower power hippies, and scripted hipster dialogue.
She doesn't look familiar.
Who can she be?
What happened to Ursula? Who is it?
Who is it? Who is it?
Who is it?
Who is it?
Who is it?
Who is it? Who is it?
It's me.
Sweet Charity was actually based on Federico Fellini's Nights of Cabiria, which starred Giulietta Massina as a prostitute in Rome, always hoping for the best. And it had a very jazzy feel to it. It had the wonderful Sammy Davis Jr. Playing a preacher in a car park, singing The Rhythm of Life, which is one of the great numbers. It had Big Spender to start with, people clicking their fingers, and it had one of my all-time favourite solo dance numbers, which is If They Could See Me Now, with Shirley MacLaine.
If they could see me now, alone with Mr. V, who's waiting on me like he was a maitre d'. I hear my buddies saying, crazy what gives, tonight she's living like the other half lives.
He was very much of the 60s. You know, Sweet Charity is a big hippie musical that was influenced by things like Hair and the sort of cut-up, choppy editing of the time that Richard Lester was pioneering. He brought that to dance, to musicals, and people were used to seeing sort of crane shots, big establishing shots. He changed all of that and brought a sort of sinewy, almost documentary flair to those big dance numbers. He was very able to amalgamate lots of styles and filter them through his own camera.
My favourite number from Sweet Charity is There's Got to Be Something Better Than This. The three girls up on the roof dancing their hearts out. In some ways, it's a very un-Fosse-like number. I mean, it's got the moves, but it's got this kind of ebullient joy.
If anyone wants to watch how to shoot a choreo number with those three women on the roof, watch Sweet Charity. Because you've got to be brave to do that. No one would do that now.
I'm gonna get up, get out! And
It was the first time that I'd ever danced. It was in a Footlights show, and we did Sweet Charity. And yeah, I was in the frog. It's unbelievable, that dance. It is unbelievable, the journey it goes on, the music, the way he uses, as a musician, the way he interprets the percussive element of it. And the humour, and the darkness, and the sexiness, and the intrigue. It's like looking at a painting. You know, you can just keep on coming back to it time and time again.
Sweet Charity's music still stands up today. I mean, Hey Big Spender is used all the time, the big band, brassy jazz of it.
Hey, big spender. Spend a little time with me.
The funky rhythms of Rhythm of Life, I think they still work.
And the rhythm of life is a powerful beat. Puts a tingle in your fingers and a tingle in your feet. Rhythm in your bedroom, rhythm in the street. Yes, the rhythm of life is a powerful beat.
What the film looks like, though, is totally of its time, and yet you think, well, no one else had done that before, so it has an avant-gardeness, even as it harks back to that hippie 60s feel.
The 60s was a time of experimentation and free love, but Fosse was already 10 years ahead of the curve, with numerous addictions and affairs. Although having always been a workaholic, he was now using amphetamines to keep himself going and Seconal to get to sleep. All the while, he worked on his next movie, 1972's Cabaret.
It's really interesting going back and looking at movies from the 70s, the ones that you expect to stand up don't, and the ones that you think, well, maybe that was period piece, turn out to be fantastically strong. Cabaret is absolutely in the latter category. It really works. I frankly don't think there has ever been an era where Cabaret looked like it wasn't speaking to the present.
Cabaret is a touchstone. I refer to it constantly. It was a wonderful story by Christopher Isherwood, but it was made palpable, made real by Fosse's toggling between the Kit Kat Club nightclub scenes and the growing Nazi threat from off-screen, and the innocence of Cliff, played by Michael York in the film, coming to this city. So it's got everything, this film. It's got the innocence, it's got it being tainted by political actions, it's got hiding it all away, and it's also got the reflection of art and life, which is what's really going on in the Kit Kat Club.
And that's what Nazi Germany stamped down upon, you know, smashed freedom of expression. In the clubs like that, even comedy wasn't safe anymore.
It's an extraordinary concoction from a man who'd only made his second movie. He had an expert grasp on what was important about dance and showbiz within the context of a wider political movement.
Tonight we may lose the battle.
Packed with provocative dance routines, memorable tunes, and a gallery of Fellini-esque grotesques, Cabaret's Kit Kat Club cemented Fosse's reputation as a major talent.
The Kit Kat Club has it all. And then you've got Sally Bowles, Fraulein Sally Bowles, in the middle of it all, who plays this vulnerable and yet brassy woman, played by Liz Minnelli.
So I got to play Sally Bowles in Cabaret, and anyone that's seen Cabaret knows that Sally Bowles is a very mixed up, lonely, kind of sad, but exotic. I mean, she's an incredible character to play, and I think she is so what was in Bob Fosse's mind. You know, like I think there's a part of what maybe Bob Fosse was going through, Sally Bowles became.
Divine decadence. I'm Sally Bowles.
I'm Brian Roberts.
Come in, Brian, darling.
I think Cabaret being the most famous song, that was when she was at her lowest and she was completely out of her head and she had one chance to go out there and get through that song. She was drunk and had nothing. She was on the floor. She had nowhere to live. The Germans had come and were taking over. The club was going to shut down. She was desperate. I think I played her at a time in my life that even though I couldn't relate to her lifestyle, I could relate to her loneliness and just the difficultness of getting through it. So I think getting to play Sally Bowles at the time I got to play her was a godsend. I think everything in life for a reason. And it was most probably the toughest time I've ever experienced in my life. And I got to play a character that was completely broken, yet come out fighting every night.
What good's permitting some prophet of doom to wipe every smile away? Life is a cabaret, old chum, so come to the cabaret.
Fosse was famous for his use of props, and never was this more evident than in the dance sequence for Mein Herr.
In a way, I think Mein Herr is quintessential Fosse. You get her astride a chair, around a chair, on a chair. He's very, very famous for using props.
He shoots it like a audience member in the club and, you know, very kind of handheld. He throws the camera into the action.
And yet Fosse shoots from between the legs, under the chairs. He makes the atmosphere of blue filter, the smokiness. It's a tangible atmosphere that's both sexy and decaying at the same time.
Because Mein Herr is just a massive number and it's sexy and it's cool and we're all in our suspenders and we're running up and down stairs and the dancers are doing incredibly, you know, sexy, gorgeous dancing.
Yeah, that piece is very objectifying. You're wearing like pretty much nothing and you're on a chair and you think, oh, it's just gonna be, you know, you're gonna feel so objectified. But it was just this, you just go to this like dead state of like tapping the floor of like, this is who I am. And then you're banging the floor and then you're like, you know, even you're banging your own body and you're just like, it just is this grounded, deep, strong female sense that I had never really tapped into. And I was like, damn, it's nice to be a female, you know? Like, and just to feel strong and to be like, yeah, this is who I am and let's go for it.
Cabaret was a multi-award-winning film, stacking up 8 Academy Awards, including Best Actress for leading lady Liza Minnelli as Sally Bowles, and Best Actor in a Supporting Role for Joel Grey as the Kit Kat Club MC.
I think if Cabaret has one big theme, it's that money and power corrupt, but that the show goes on and that people will be resilient throughout it. So you get Sally Bowles and the MC singing about money and having a buck or a yen and a hole in the roof, but people can dance their way through it. I think that's very Fosse, that dance is defiance, dance is a continuation of life. Dance goes on even while outside the world is crumbling and people are falling apart and the systems are falling apart. The system of dance can live on.
In 1973, Fosse did what no director had done before or since, winning an Oscar for the movie Cabaret, a Tony for musical Pippin, and an Emmy for his TV special Liza with a Z.
That's a really big deal. I also suspect that it slightly went to his head and his workload becomes insane, which probably leads to health issues, which are then reflected famously in all that jazz.
1974. His workload was immense, working concurrently on stage and screen projects. This only served to make his addictions worse, as his appetite for drink, drugs, cigarettes, and women resulted in the first of 3 heart attacks. As a testament to Fosse's drive, this did not hold him back, as he pushed through to complete his 3rd film, Lenny, set in the dingy and desperate comedy clubs of New York City.
Lenny is the small black and white indie-style movie which Bob Fosse chose to follow up cabaret with. Rather than adapt another musical from 42nd Street, he chose to dive into the old Greenwich Village comedy clubs of the 50s and 60s to bring the story of Lenny to the screen. They needed a big star, so Dustin Hoffman got to play Jewish comedian Lenny Bruce.
Would you marry a woman like that? Oh, yeah, are you kidding me? Would you let your wife dress that way? No, you're kidding, knock her right on her ass.
Lenny is the story of the nightclub entertainer Lenny Bruce. It captures the nightclub atmosphere of those Greenwich Village comedy clubs and that scene, that folk scene. But it also throbs with sexuality. The relationship between Lenny and Honey, between Dustin Hoffman and Valerie Perrine, is rather electric. But it's also, when you look at it now, a rather poisonous relationship because she's exploited by Lenny. She looks bruised by the experience, and it's quite a bruising experience as a film. You could see what attracted Bob Fosse to it, because it is about perfection and it's about artistry and about not being able to hold your tongue. It's very much a sort of coded letter of defiance from Bob Fosse to say, this is really what I'm about.
You can't stop the information because the information keeps the country strong. You need the deviant. Don't shut him up. You need that madman to stand up, tell you when you're blowing it.
Fosse was particularly hard on Valerie Perrine, who played Bruce's wife, Honey. Fosse told Perrine that her boyfriend had been killed in an airplane crash, solely to get the expression of shock he wanted. Perrine won an Oscar nomination for the role.
He was one of those directors that lived hard and play hard. He smoked, he did coke, he drank. He had fun. I mean, there's no denying that he belonged to that generation of dictatorial directors.
You have directors that want what they want, and they'll make you cry. And I've seen people been called fat elephant, move to the left, and things like that in the most ridiculous circumstances.
Did Fosse work through a reign of terror? Possibly. I don't think you need to work like that. But again, I don't think he was the healthiest of individuals at all, and probably not the nicest. And many great artists aren't. I can separate the man from the work. The man was probably very unpleasant. The work is sensational.
Fosse was described as a tormented genius who often worked in a state of irritability and hyper-alertness with a dependency on uppers and drink. Never was this depicted better than in his autobiographical film, All That Jazz. Astounding in its daring and scope, putting all facets of his life on display. A return to the musical format after Lenny, All That Jazz was considered by fans to have invented modern screen grammar and has influenced directors as diverse as Tarantino and Aronofsky.
The first thing to say about All That Jazz is that it doesn't feature the song All That Jazz. That's from Chicago. But he took that hit number from Chicago and used it as the title of his most autobiographical work. It's the title, perhaps, that sums up his entire career, the way he worked. Everything about All That Jazz is in Bob Fosse.
All That Jazz follows the exploits of director Joe Gideon, played by Jaws actor Roy Scheider, as a virtual Fosse lookalike, taking in his rehearsals for a new Broadway show, the editing of his movie, and the inevitable round of drugs, booze, and women.
Oh, my sorry.
Katie!
I should have called first.
Oh. When you first see All That Jazz, you think this is made by someone who despises the business. This is someone who just found it all dirty and too difficult and hard work. I mean, it's about death. It's about dance. And it's about kind of keeping the two alive and how they're sort of symbiotic bedfellows. They're partners in each other.
Bob Fosse is such an artist. I think this film was a necessity for him to continue living. Creating is his bread and butter that gets him through each day. So in that sense, All That Jazz backstage footage wasn't like a big reveal. I think, a lot of backstage is like that.
Move down, Victoria, and sing it out. Here we go.
5, 6, 7, 8.
Any seat you grab will be first class. 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and I don't like it.
When Fosse chose someone to play himself, he took Roy Scheider. So he didn't go for like the most handsome actor you could possibly find. He chose a flawed individual with a funny nose and a slightly kind of hollowed out look.
You see insight into Bob Fosse's life. From the outside, it's glam, and he's producing and successful and winning everything. But you can see how much of a struggle it is on a daily basis. Bob Fosse used this film to kind of open up about his life behind, his life behind doors, and it was quite honest and not this godlike figure. And I think it might have been kind of like a release for him to be like, this is who I am.
Showtime, folks.
I mean, how do you do a biopic, biography, whatever, depict someone who's, incredible in their field? How do you do that well? But he managed to do it. Everything that is him is in that film. And it's interesting that it's embraced, because not many people would want to embrace everything about them necessarily, but flaws and warts and all are in that.
I think we can say Bob Fosse was obsessed with women. I think he was brought up by them, surrounded by them, and couldn't resist them.
His use of women, in every sense, is actually there in the work. It's not, well, why bring the private life in? He brought the private life in.
Just don't kid yourself that you're doing this show for any other reason except guilt about me.
Guilt? What guilt?
For never going one day when you were faithful to me?
Oh, that guilt.
Problematic by today's standards was Fosse's behavior toward some of his female dancers. A 1980 People magazine article quoted one of his dancers as saying, "He's going to try to make you. He tries with every girl and gets a fair percentage. He doesn't give you much respect."
Would Fosse's behaviour be accepted nowadays in the workplace?
I don't know, maybe he would get away with, being such a womanizer, and I'm sure there's many out there. I think there would be a lot more women that would talk up if they were uncomfortable today.
I think the Me Too movement, I totally do think that has changed things. I think that would be different now.
Victoria Porter, is this your home phone?
All that jazz is about ego. It's about rampant ego. It's about rampant male id. Roy Scheider, who plays Joe Gideon, the choreographer, the director, the master puppeteer at the centre of it all. Everything he does is grist to his artistic mill. Every line someone says, he can use it later. He steals everything. It's all consuming. It makes life very difficult when work is what your life is. And that's what we see with Roy Scheider. We see him being consumed by his commitment to perfection, or his quest to perfection. The opening scene set to George Benson's On Broadway is funky, it's alive, it's sexy, it's got that desperation to it. You can hear the sinews of the dancers straining, you can hear them desperately trying to reach out for fame, which is right in front of them. It's got all the leg warmers that we associate with such a word, but it's got also it sets Roy Scheider's character up as being this grand dictator. He's saying yes to people, he's saying no to others, he's organising the troops left and right. It's a sort of fabulous piece because you got George Benson singing On Broadway, the old standard, but it's set in this very kind of modern way, and it doesn't even necessarily work with what they're dancing to. So it takes you out of the movie. So it brings something different to the musical form, almost a documentary-like examination, almost anthropological examination of these creatures, these dancers who like herded like cattle in front of one man to kind of be picked and thrown apart. There's a mass of humanity. And I think that sort of almost sums up the entire career of Bob Fosse in just that little 5-minute bit.
So I think that he does portray that world very clearly.
And also, I think, you know, being in a ballet company, you know, you are in the company, but to have to audition all the time for different parts is incredibly hard. So, you know, you look at the amount of people on the stage, you know, trying to audition, they whittle them out, they whittle them out, they whittle them out. You wouldn't do it if you didn't love it, because it's really not, it's hard. It's really hard work.
Bob Fosse's All That Jazz won the Palme d'Or at Cannes in 1980, and I think what appealed to that very cinephile, very French audience is its behind-the-scenes look at the struggle, the artist tortured in the middle of it. I think that's what appealed to the jury at Cannes in 1980, that this is a dirty business, but it's one really worth fighting for.
I think that's just typical of Bob Fosse, the whole backstage stuff, because I think he liked to shock. And I think that was kind of maybe the darker side of Bob Fosse, letting people know really what goes on, snorting cocaine off of their dressing room tables and, you know, making out, the manicness of what happens before you go and hit stage. So I think that was most probably the darker side of Bob Fosse, letting us all know it's not all what it appears. It's not all twinkle lights and smiles.
1983 saw Fosse's final movie, Star 80. Once again focusing in on the dark side of the entertainment industry, but minus the dance routines and humor that had lifted his previous films.
Star 80 is probably the least known work by Bob Fosse, mainly because it doesn't really feature dancing, and it doesn't feature jazz hands, and it doesn't feature big choreographed moments. Except when you look at it, it's all there. It's the story of a Playmate of the Year, Dorothy Stratton, who was taken from small town Canada, where she was discovered by a pimp played by Eric Roberts, who sends off naked Polaroids of her to Hugh Hefner, and suddenly she becomes a star in Playboy magazine. But he doesn't stop there, he wants more. And he tries to push her to become a movie star, an actress. And it's a real life story that Bob Fosse saw in a Village Voice article and decided to take that to the big screen. And it became an infamous case, that of Dorothy Stratton, who was, no spoilers here I'm afraid, but murdered by her husband. But this is a real timepiece movie, this, 1983. It has kind of jazz funk on the soundtrack, played by Chuck Mangione. It has Bob Fosse choreographed moments. It's got a roller disco and pyjama party scene, which was at the Hugh Hefner's Playboy mansion. All of that's there, and what really is Bob Fosse about this is this desperation, this underbelly that powers show business and powers the seedier side of show business, the desperation to succeed, the desperation to make it big, the desperation to become, like the title says, a star of the 80s. So it's about all the mechanisms that are involved in becoming a star. So it's the star themselves, played by Mariel Hemingway as Dorothy Stratton. It's about the boyfriend, played by Eric Roberts, who wants her money, who kind of powers her at all costs to the love relationship and jealousy. It's also about the impresario, Cliff Robertson, playing Hugh Hefner, who can make them a star, and the hangers-on. And that's all showbiz. So while Bob Fosse clearly was in love with showbiz, he also hated it. And that comes out in Star 80.
I have this terrific idea. I'm your manager, right? Well, as your manager, I think you should go to New York and become a big movie star. I'll stay here and work on the Dorothy Stratton poster. It's gonna make us a fortune. Good idea.
Star 80 is a huge disappointment. I think it's a sad end to Fosse's directing career. And it's largely because, again, we have a lack of perspective from Fosse on his material. He's made up his mind about how innocent the girl was and how terrible the murderer was. Now, whilst both those facts are true, a better script would have made those characters stronger. It's actually quite a hard watch because you know what the director thinks at every point. There isn't room for the audience to make its mind up. Eric Roberts works really hard in Star 80 and delivers a good performance. It's not his fault that the material is so unyielding. It's also not his fault that Fosse puts terrible, doomy music on the soundtrack. So his character is kind of squashed by the music that's added, which is a real sign of a director being over-controlling in all the wrong ways.
Look, if you've had an affair, that's okay with me, I understand. But that doesn't mean that we should throw the whole marriage down the toilet. Please, Dorothy, at least tell me where I stand.
I have to have more freedom.
Although Star 80 was to be the final movie Fosse directed, this was not intentional. Despite its box office failure, he was still in demand and considered directing many more movies during his final years. Amongst these was Chicago, with Madonna, Michelle Pfeiffer, and Jack Nicholson attached. However, the project never materialized, and Chicago the movie was eventually directed by Rob Marshall.
Chicago eventually hit the screen in 2002 in Rob Marshall's film that went on to win 6 Oscars. But virtually everybody in Hollywood and in the UK had done a version of the script. There were dozens flying around in the whole development period, which went on for literally decades before Marshall's film. One of them was Fosse. He wanted Madonna and all sorts of people in it. Who knows what that would have been like, but I do think there's a case for saying that Chicago is the quintessential Bob Fosse work, the stage version which was written and directed and choreographed by Fosse is his monument.
Bob Fosse's distinctive choreography is still recognizable in Rob Marshall's Chicago, with a thanks to Fosse in the closing credits.
All I care about is love.
One of the great pities, I think, is that Bob Fosse never got to do his own movie version of Chicago. He did it on Broadway, and that's the play we're still seeing revived now on the London stage and the Broadway stage in '96 and 2009, all over the world. They're doing Chicago's. But he never got to commit that to film. It was left to Rob Marshall to do it with Renee Zellweger and Richard Gere and Catherine Zeta-Jones. The film was a big success for Miramax in 2002. But I got a feeling that Fosse would have done it better.
What would Chicago have been like if it was Bob Fosse, not Rob Marshall? I don't think it would have been as shiny. I think it would have been more enclosed, more of a sense of the enclosed that Fosse would get, the intoxicating, the slightly claustrophobic, but also like really putting the audience member into it. It probably would have been too cool for Hollywood. Fosse would have brought it right back. Rob Marshall, because he was, I don't know, he embraced the theatricality of it and the bigness of what you get in theatre and took that onto the screen.
There was a story that originally Jack Nicholson was going to be Billy Flynn, for Bob Fosse and Madonna was going to be it, and Michelle Pfeiffer. So maybe that would have turned out different, but what I think Fosse would have done is shot the dances better than Rob Marshall did. Rob Marshall, you couldn't really admire the dance. You couldn't quite see what the dancers were up to. And I think Fosse would have given it that distance and that pull between the public and private that Chicago's about, that would have had that toggle that Cabaret has between the Kit Kat Club and the outside. Chicago would have had that with the jail and the outside world, with the show business that Billy Flynn was obsessed with, this kind of the mask behind it all. Fosse would have got underneath that mask, I think, a bit more. So it's one of the enduring shames that we never got to see his production of Chicago.
In Bob's own words, dance expresses joy better than anything else. And nothing could be truer for a man who lived his life almost like a performance. Although his final act was played out in Gwen Verdon's arms as he succumbed to a heart attack in 1987, a complex man and a true artist.
If you want to know what Bob Fosse was all about, watch Reiser with a Z. It's a TV special he made with Minnelli. And in it, there's a number, Bye Bye Blackbird. And it has every element of Fosse's choreography, and it's actually much simpler and less elaborate than many of his numbers, and it doesn't have the self-indulgence. Because it's a TV special, it's very simple, and it's there to showcase her talent and that of the dancers with her. It's got finger clicking, it's got teacup hands, it's got the amoeba-like move across the stage. The dancers are in white gloves, and it just works. It's a completely delightful number, and Minnelli is leading the number and looks supremely confident and supremely happy. It's a really tiny moment, but a great one.
Make my bed and light the little blackbird, bye.
I think it's very interesting hearing of people who are really lauded and applauded to think that they would have their own insecurities. You know, and they might be perfectionists, or they never think that they're doing it well enough, or they, you know, beat themselves up. As a fan and as a non-looker, it's, you know, it's like, how? You know, how could you think that? But I think for lots of people, that's what drives them, because they're constantly looking for perfection.
I know I have huge anxiety if something's not right. You know, it takes over my life. I will lose sleep and it will really panic me. So I think there's such a fine line, which maybe is what makes people like Fosse and anybody else in this industry so passionate about what they do. There's such a fine line because you put so much pressure on yourself. And then when it doesn't work out, you beat yourself up terribly. And it can really affect your mood and bring the whole company down.
Fosse had his personal battles with, you know, addiction, anxiety. I think Fosse was on a path to self-destruction. The smoking, the drinking, you know, everything. Sex, womanizing, the whole thing, overworking. I don't know, some people just wouldn't go any other way. I don't know if he knew any other way, actually. That's how he operated. Would he have ever had a sort of epiphany moment, being like, I think I might take up Buddhism? I don't think so. His lifestyle to his work were linked intrinsically.
Fosse became an icon, an archetype of the driven director Hoofer, achieving cultural impact long after his demise. If living on after death is possible, Fosse's legacy could be proof of this, as his influence has filtered through to many areas of popular culture today.
We see Fosse's influence now across all genres of performance. So pop music, theatre, film, styling, fashion. He's kind of seeped into the everyday life, probably without 99% of people knowing who Bob Fosse is.
He died when most of the youngsters coming up today, he died long before they were born. So they haven't got that sort of background.
For the new generation of dancers coming in, I think, you know, just saying how important it is to find their voice and to be individual. And obviously Bob Fosse would be such a good kind of a person for them to research and learn about, because he was kind of the quintessential person who stayed strong to who he was and brought a unique style that made him so unique and different.
Yeah, Fosse can be cliched. It's about how it's done and how it's respected and whatever is being taken from his work at any stage.
Fosse's legacy lives on. You can see it literally in the work of Anne Reinking remaking Chicago in his image. But it also lives on in the sense that his style is so clear and so obvious and referenced by other people.
I mean, I can give you examples, actually. I mean, you see it in pop, you know, the Single Ladies, Beyonce video. I mean, her video was based on Bob Fosse. I don't know if she name-checked him or not, but I hope she did. So it's rife throughout pop.
The Little Prince, where Bob Fosse is dancing with the Little Prince, it is so Michael Jackson. I mean, there is no way that Michael Jackson did not watch that video and be inspired. I mean, down to the shoes, to the trousers, to the leg flicks, to the hands, to the typical Michael Jackson kind of hip hop.
It's all there, right? You could replace them sometimes. Like from the back, they're kind of identical. They're quite the same.
I mean, Michael Jackson is the ultimate dancing pop star. Ultimate. No one close. And where did he get? It's like almost his most essential move from Bob Fosse. So I guess that shows the reach of the man. Yeah, Fosse has completely influenced my stage shows, you know, and I say that unabashedly. In fact, I say it proudly. I want people to see the references, because everyone's referencing people. I want people, it's like, let's use a cool reference. I hope he'd like it. I hope he would.
First of all, I think Bob Fosse is getting stronger and stronger again. I think the remake of everything, I feel that he's becoming more and more well known. I think the more it's talked about, the more people, you know, think about the likes of Michael Jackson or Beyonce and people that are still releasing music and putting on West End shows today. Chicago's currently out there. Cabaret's just been on.
And jazz hands, that's Bob Fosse. He invented jazz hands, and now that's vernacular. That's something that people say in the street. That's very unusual for a choreographer and a filmmaker to have invented a thing that people talk about.
When I think of Fosse, ultimately, I think of someone who is anti-establishment and working within the establishment. And those are the most powerful people.
He just lives on, and I think it's kind of like he just keeps on giving. So I think the Fosse legacy will just carry on and on. Yeah, and I would say the part that makes him so unique is the spirit behind Bob Fosse.